Hi there, how are you guys? I am excited to share today. Thank you, Lori Gasca, for the invitation to just share my thoughts on what it looks like to move from a scarcity mindset into abundance. And I start with my own story. That's, I guess, where I feel like everything really begins, right? Is the journey that we have been through, and then taking our journey and being willing to share that with others. So it began really, well, all my life, right? It's my story, but I grew up in Minnesota, and in Minnesota, as a Midwestern girl who now lives in Texas and who has been here since 2005. So I'm a Minnesotan Texan, something like that. But anyway, our motto was pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And I grew up really with a worldview of scarcity. So I feel like I can really bring my own personal experience to this journey. And I'm just a big believer in tools. Well, what happened to me in 2012 after just really working so hard most of my life, what happened is my value got connected to what I do. And it just never really was enough. It didn't really matter what I did, even though I was an overachiever and most everything I set my hand to pretty much worked out. There's still with this deeper place inside of me where I still never felt like I was enough. And finally, my body had enough, really, of me pushing myself so hard. And my thyroid and my adrenals crashed in 2012, and I was a hot mess, like emotionally, physically, spiritually, everything was coming into question in my life. It pretty much sucked, but God, right? So in that really dark moment of my life, along came this book called The Gifts of Imperfection by Dr. Brene Brown. And now I spend the majority of my life teaching people how to live wholeheartedly, which is what her research is about. And to me, wholeheartedly is abundance, right? It's living in a place of wholeness where we know that we are enough, that sufficiency is another great word for enoughness, sufficiency. So I began to realize that I was swimming in shame. And guess what, guys? We live in a consumer culture, which means we live in a shame-based culture. So if we don't wake up to this reality, we also will be swimming in shame and will be fighting feelings of not being enough. And it's just not a good way to live. So today, my hope and my prayer is that as I talk, there will be something that will really resonate with you and that will begin helping you on your journey of sufficiency and abundance, because there's just so much that we can be appreciating in our lives. And when we learn how to do that, things begin to change inside of us. And all of a sudden we look around and there's so much opportunity and so many blessings. But it is a practice, and it does take work. So for me, this journey began with realizing, A, man, I need help, and B, I am swimming in shame. So going through this work has really changed my life. And I don't think you can bring someone someplace that you haven't been. You can't talk with any authority if you haven't been there yourself. So I'm telling you, you guys, I know lack and I know scarcity. And I know the pain of what that produces. And I also know that there is a path home to ourselves. There is a place of transformation where we can wake up every day really believing that we are enough and that we have enough. And we can look at the opportunities set before us. But it takes work to get there for sure. So our culture, being a consumer-based culture, right, is constantly giving us messages that we're not enough. And they want us to believe that. Why? So we will keep buying things. So we've got to wake up and we've got to become intentional. I believe if we don't do that, we are headed for trouble, and we will spend the rest of our lives in lack, in our mindset, which is really almost everything, isn't it? Because what we think affects so much of our entire life. So let's change that hardwiring, and that's the beauty of our brain, right? is we can create new neural pathways. So there is always hope. Doesn't matter if you feel really stuck right now. I want you to know that there is hope, and I am a picture of that, and I hope you can see that. So as I mentioned earlier, my identity was totally connected with what I do. And the problem with that too is everything I was doing just kept working. And pretty soon my body said no more. So I crash. And then the blessing is, here comes The Gifts of Imperfection by Dr. Brene Brown and that work. And here comes the oils. I mean, I could cry in gratitude and thankfulness for that moment in my life. I had no idea what God was bringing to me after crying out for help and really being in a very dark place. To have oils and Brene's work come when it did and transform my life the way it did is such an answer to prayer. That's why I'm such a huge believer in sharing the gifts that have been given us. Guys, you've got to share. If the oils have helped you, you've got to share. You can't hoard that and keep it to yourself. So be motivated by love. And people know the difference. They know the difference. So when I realized that I was swimming in shame, now I know what it is. And shame, you guys, is very painful, right? It's that I'm not enough. It's also connected to our worth. So what I mean by that is, instead of, oh, I failed at something, I am a failure. You see the difference? Instead of I screwed up, I am a screw up. And it's highly correlated with addiction. It's highly correlated with anorexia, suicide. So it's really important that we come to understand what it is and that we build our shame resilience. So shame-based culture, scarcity culture, moving from scarcity to abundance. We got to know what shame is, and we got to know how to come out of that and build resilience. And two key things is self-compassion and empathy. What do you say to yourself when things aren't going well? Are you kind to yourself, or do you beat yourself up? And if you beat yourself up, we got to create new maps in our brain where we learn how to practice self-compassion. And self-compassion is three things. The first thing is treating yourself like you would someone you love deeply. So the things you say to yourself, would you say to someone you love deeply? If that's not the case, we got to stop and we got to reframe. And we got to begin to practice kindness. One thing that I work a lot with my clients on as a coach is permission slips. So permission to be kind to yourself, permission to rest, permission to feel what you're feeling, permission to fail, whatever it is, and you start practicing them. You write them out, put them on your mirror in your bathroom, and day in, day out, look at them. And call on your permission slips when you're in a hard place. It's a real tangible way to practice self-compassion. And then also common humanity. Know that you are human. And what you are experiencing isn't unique only to you. What happens a lot of time with shame is we isolate. And that's dangerous, because when we isolate, then we begin to believe we are the only person in the world who's ever struggled like this. And then it just exacerbates shame. So we got to reach out to people that have earned the right to hear our stories, right? And be vulnerable and understand that we are human. It's so interesting to me. I did this for years. Like I'm not allowed to be human. And guess what, guys? Humans are not perfect. And when you can begin to laugh at your imperfections and accept them, like this freedom comes. Because I couldn't do that for years. I mean, I was my own worst critic. Like, I did not have permission to fail. I did not have permission to screw up. I needed to be perfect. Brene's book, The Gifts of Imperfection, I'm like, excuse me? How do you put gifts with imperfection? But really, they are. Imperfections are what make you human and are what make you able to connect with other people. Isn't it true? Like, when it comes to suffering, it's a deep place to connect in with others, knowing that we're not alone. All right. And then finally, mindfulness. And that has to do with paying attention to what is going on inside of you. Not just shoving it under the rug, not just pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, but actually giving yourself permission to be where you are and move through it with a lens of hope. I did not do that. I did not let myself feel what I was feeling. I just kept going, and then eventually my body said no. Because you guys know, right, that the body doesn't lie, and you know that emotion has energy. So we've got to learn how to move through our emotions in a healthy way and release them. And that's when, awesome release oil comes into play. 10 drops of that, Epsom salt bathtub, do it all the time. Anytime I feel emotionally hooked, like in a hard place, like sometimes I don't even know what's going on inside of me, cellular memory, right? But if I pay attention, allow myself to feel what I'm feeling, get in the tub and release it, so much better than shoving it down and then getting sick. All right, so we got to use our oils. We got to pass them on to other people and really understand that emotion, it's data. So it's good information. It means, hey, I just need to release something, but it doesn't need to dictate your life. All right, so self-compassion is huge when it comes to moving from shame and scarcity to abundance. All right, then empathy, and that's showing up in people's lives. Putting yourself in their shoes, connecting into their emotion. What are they feeling? So it doesn't have to do with necessarily this, like you may not even have ever experienced the struggle someone's going through, but you can still be empathetic because it has to do with connecting in with the emotion. So you find out how someone's feeling in their struggle, and rage, right? Grief. Sadness, what it feels like to feel alone and in a dark place. Those things because you're human, and you tell someone, hey, I've been there. You're not alone. And that's an antidote to shame. So if you take a petri dish full of shame and add self-compassion and empathy, it dissipates. That's how powerful this is. And that's why it's so important that we learn to practice this day in and day out. People need to be heard, not fixed. So that's a big deal, okay? There are some myths to scarcity, and I want to kind of bring that to your attention. If you haven't ever heard of the book, it's called The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist. I highly recommend it. It goes after scarcity mindset. In fact, one of my members in my community with Young Living, in 2017, I feel like God always gives me a word for the year, and the word for that year was abundance for me. And she told me about that book, and I'm telling you guys, it changed my life. Lynn Twist was head of the Hunger Project, which has to do with feeding the whole world, believing that there are enough resources on this earth that no one should be going hungry. And guess what? It's actually true. But through her work, she worked with some of the most influential and wealthiest people in the world, as well as some people who financially were in great need, in great lack. And her findings were that some of the most wealthiest people really struggled with scarcity. So scarcity doesn't have to do with our checkbooks, you guys. So don't think that once you hit diamond or above that, you're going to just be living in abundance if you haven't addressed what's going on in your mindset, in your thinking. She also found that those who didn't have a lot financially many times were content. They walked in great peace and great appreciation. So we need to realize that it is a mindset. And she has 3 myths to scarcity, and I want to break those down for you. The first one is that there's not enough. Buckminster Fuller, he is a scientist, a futurist, an architect, an engineer. He's an amazing man. If you get a chance, look him up. You can Google him. But he came to a place of knowing that there are enough resources on this earth to really handle what's going on as far as hunger and poverty. In fact, I'm going to read you his quote, or this quote from his website, and it says this: Fuller and the National Academy both agreed that the resources and technology to end the worst aspects of homelessness, disease, and malnutrition are available. The only thing lacking has been the social and political will to make physical success for all humanity a reality. So that's a big deal, guys. He said this could be the most significant turning point in our evolution because it means that we could move from a you or me world, a world where either you or I make it, and where we need to compete and fight to see who wins, to a world where you and me, all of us, can make it. So it's believing that we are connected to an infinite source, right? And for me, that's God. My faith is really important to me. And I know that it doesn't all depend on me. Believing that you are constantly met with the grace of God, the grace of the universe, the distinction of enough, wholeness, sufficiency, completeness. So if we understand that there is enough, we don't have to be out there fighting for more and more and more, and the energy changes and everything shifts. All right, so that's the first myth. The second myth is more is better. So what happens then is we start hoarding and we start accumulating. And the next thing you know, we have so much stuff and we're not really grateful for any of it. Why? Because we think we have to get more. And it bogs us down. So more is not better. When we get more, we get to share. And guess what? When we move into that place of gratefulness and thankfulness that overflows into sharing to others, it creates something inside of us and it multiplies and it brings this place of abundance and this place of wholeness and this place of peace, because we are meant to help each other. We are meant to be there for each other and not keep everything to ourselves. To whom much is given, much is required. And I know many of you, part of the reason why you're in Young Living is you want to get to a place where you can give a lot away. But I am going to encourage you to start now. Don't wait until then. Begin now living a life of knowing that you are connected to an infinite source and begin giving things away. And then the third myth is that's just the way it is and there is nothing we can do about it. It just isn't true. If we believe that, guys, then where's the hope? So we need to know that there is something we can do and connect in and begin living this lifestyle, this mindset of abundance, and it shifts everything. So I want to read just a couple great quotes from Lynn Twist. I think they were so powerful. The principle of sufficiency. So sufficiency is enoughness, right? Sometimes when we look at the word abundance, it's all about getting more. But if we start from a place of more, we're going to end up at lack again. So we actually want to start at a place of enough. When you know you have enough and you move out of there, because if you're constantly looking for more and more and more, you're just feeding that thing. And you're going to end up in that whole worldview of scarcity. So if you let go of trying to get more of what you don't really need, which is what we're brainwashed to want more of, it frees up all that energy that's tied up in the chase to turn and pay attention to what you've got. And when you pay attention to what you already have, when you nourish it, when you appreciate it, and when you share it and make a difference with it, it expands. And it expands before your very eyes. What you appreciate appreciates. And then the money starts to flow like water. It touches your life. It touches everyone else's life. And everything begins to change. It multiplies. When we hold on, we have this energy of constraint. When we have open hands and we live in a place of knowing we are enough and we have enough, it's like something shifts. And the next thing, you give and more comes. You give and more comes. So I want to charge you with working on appreciating what you already have. Start a gratefulness journal. Write it down 3 times or 3 things a day. What am I grateful for? Look around you. Take time to stop, to see, and then move out into the world with great gratitude and great capacity to share, because you know you are connected to an infinite source and you know that you are enough and that you have enough. So gratitude journal, being grateful, cultivate self-compassion, knowing that you are enough. Do what you need to do to share. Don't hoard. Speak forth what God has given you in Young Living and watch it multiply. So I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for this time. And I hope you got a few nuggets that can really help you shift from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of enough. Because here's the truth. You are enough and you have enough and you are connected to an infinite source. And so there is no lack. All right. So God bless you. And thank you for this time just to come and share my heart with you all.